When the Galactic Federation's most renowned food critics discover Earth's forgotten spirits, they learn that sometimes the deadliest things come in glass bottles, aged to perfection. I really should have known something was off when my quantum scanner detected ethanol signatures in complex molecular arrangements that shouldn't exist on a supposedly dead world. But after 17 years as the Galactic Federation's most acclaimed food critic, even I, Zyx'tal of the 7th Nebula, can get complacent. Most peculiar, I muttered, adjusting my sensory tendrils as I studied the readouts on my ship's holographic display. Earth had been classified as a preservation zone centuries ago, just another rock where primitive life had failed to achieve stellar classification. Yet here I was, picking up energy signatures that made absolutely no sense. Analysis complete, Chief Curator. My ship's AI announced with its usual pompous tone. The molecular structures appear to be deliberately aged organic compounds. I waved two of my upper appendages dismissively. Impossible. This is a Class D preservation world. Nothing here has the technological capability to… I paused, my color-shifting epidermis flickering through shades of confusion. Did you say deliberately aged? The ship zoomed in on a cluster of stone buildings, nestled in what my database identified as the Scottish Highlands. Strange heat signatures emerged from within, along with those impossibly complex molecular structures. Chief Curator, the AI continued, I feel compelled to point out that these readings bear striking similarities to the legendary nectar of Betelgeuse. That got my attention. I'd sampled the nectar exactly once in my career. A single drop had cost more than a small moon. The complexity, the subtle molecular dance of flavors. And here was something potentially even more intricate. Plot a landing course, I ordered, already preparing my atmospheric adaptation suit, and notify the council that I'll be slightly delayed for the Nova Centauri restaurant opening. Chief Curator, perhaps I should remind you that unauthorized landing on preservation worlds is strictly… Note in the log that I detected signs of potentially hazardous chemical processing. I interrupted smoothly. That makes this an investigatory landing under Section 7 of the Preservation Code. The AI's pause was just long enough to convey disapproval. Noted, Chief Curator. Though I feel compelled to point out this is the 4th investigatory landing this solar cycle, I ignored the commentary, too focused on the readings. In 17 years of reviewing the galaxy's finest establishments, I'd sampled everything from quantum-age stellar wines to psychic cocktails that let you taste your own memories. I'd documented delicacies that cost more than planets and beverages that altered the fabric of space-time. But these readings, they hinted at something different. Something that shouldn't exist on a world this primitive. Something that made my culinary curiosity impossible to resist. As we descended through Earth's atmosphere, I had no idea I was about to discover that sometimes the most remarkable flavors in the universe come from the most unlikely places, and that humans, in their brief existence, had mastered an art form that would change galactic cuisine forever. They'd learned to make poison delicious. The landing wasn't exactly subtle. My ship's camouflage system struggled with the concept of inconspicuous and settled on mimicking something called a tourist bus, which apparently meant becoming bright red and unnecessarily elongated. At least the locals seemed used to such vehicles winding through their narrow, mountainous roads. I emerged from my ship into what my sensors indicated was autumn, a peculiar seasonal phenomenon where the local vegetation committed chromatic suicide. The air carried hints of smoke, earth, and something else. Something that made my olfactory receptors tingle with anticipation. You'll be wanting the tour then? I spun around, all 4 of my hearts jumping simultaneously. A human stood there, seemingly unperturbed by my obviously alien appearance. He was elderly by their standards, with facial hair that reminded me of certain sentient fungi from the Andromeda Galaxy, and eyes that sparkled with what I would soon learn was called mischief. I am Zyx'tal, I announced, trying to project proper galactic authority despite my surprise. Chief Culinary Curator of the… another food critic, the human interrupted, chuckling. Though I must say, you are the first one with tentacles. I am Ruaidri McCaskill, but most folks just call me Rory. Master Distiller of Glendreach for 43 years. He gestured toward the stone buildings I detected from orbit. Welcome to the oldest operational whiskey distillery in Scotland. I blinked all 3 of my eyes in succession. You are not alarmed by my appearance? Rory shrugged, a fascinating movement that humans apparently use to convey everything from uncertainty to profound philosophical insight. After 4 decades watching people's faces when they try our experimental batches, it here is not much that alarms me anymore. Besides, he added with another chuckle, you are not even the strangest critic we've had this month. Last week, we had a fellow who insisted on tasting everything with his elbow. Before I could process this baffling statement, Rory was already walking toward the nearest building, his weathered hand beckoning me to follow. Come on then, you'll be wanting to see the casks first, I expect. Though I should warn you, our whiskey can be a bit intense for first-timers. I followed, my professional dignity slightly ruffled. I assure you, I have sampled the finest spirits from across 12 galaxies. I once drank liquid starlight distilled from the tears of a dying sun. Did you now? Rory responded, pushing open a heavy wooden door. Well, that's very nice. But tell me, have you ever tried something that's been waiting patiently in oak for longer than you've been alive? Something that spent 50 years drawing wisdom from wood and weather, turning time itself into flavor? The room we entered was vast, dimly lit, and filled with row upon row of wooden containers. My sensors immediately began registering complex organic compounds that made absolutely no sense. The air itself seemed thick with molecules that shouldn't exist in such combinations. Welcome, Rory said with evident pride, to what we call the angel's share. I had no idea that this moment, standing in a chilly room full of wooden barrels on a supposedly primitive world, was about to revolutionize my understanding of not just spirits, but of humanity itself. Rory led me to what he called the tasting room, a space lined with dark wood and leather that smelled of time itself. My sensory tendrils were already working overtime trying to process the complex molecules in the air. The walls held frames containing what appeared to be preserved vegetation, barley, my database, helpfully supplied, along with cryptic maps marked with regions like Speyside and Islay. Now then, Rory said, placing a peculiar curved vessel before me. This is what we call a Glencairn glass, designed to concentrate the aromas. He held up a bottle that my sensors indicated was at least 4 decades old. We'll start with something gentle, a 40-year-old Glenreach, aged in Oloroso sherry casks. I activated my molecular analysis suite, preparing to catalog every compound. Shall I calibrate my taste receptors for standard toxic filtration? Rory's beard twitched with amusement. Here's the fun in that. Best to experience it as intended. He poured a modest amount of amber liquid into the glass. First, we nose it. I extended my primary olfactory tendril toward the glass, then jerked back as my sensors exploded with data. Impossible! I'm detecting over 200 distinct aromatic compounds, but they're harmonizing with each other, creating new sensory patterns? Rory nodded sagely. That'll be the wood interaction. Every cask tells its own story. This one singing of dried fruits, honey, and just a hint of maritime air from when the storm of '89 damaged the warehouse roof. I leaned in again, more cautiously this time. My species prided itself on our sophisticated sensory capabilities. We could taste the individual photons in starlight, after all. But this was different. The molecules weren't just complex, they were dancing together, creating symphonies of scent that changed with each passing moment. The color is shifting, I observed, fascinated. No, wait, my color is shifting. My epidermis had indeed begun to cycle through various shades of amazement. Happens to the best of us, Rory chuckled. Now, take a small sip. Let it coat your tasting apparatus, or tongue, or whatever you've got in there. I followed his instructions, allowing a tiny amount of the liquid to make contact with my flavor receptors. For exactly 2.3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, by the 7 singularities, all 4 of my hearts began beating in syncopated rhythm. My secondary brain shut down temporarily while my primary brain tried to process the explosion of sensory information. Take your time, Rory advised, looking far too amused. The first sip's always a bit of a revelation. Words failed me, which for a galactic food critic was somewhat problematic. How could I describe the way the liquid seemed to evolve on my taste receptors? The initial shock of ethanol, a poison, my database helpfully reminded me, transformed into waves of complexity, sweet compounds dancing with bitter ones, organic molecules performing elaborate chemical ballets, traces of minerals telling geological stories spanning millions of years. This is impossible, I managed finally, my voice modulator crackling with emotion. The level of molecular orchestration required. You'd need quantum computers just to model these interactions. Yet you achieved this with wood, time, and grain, and water, Rory added. Don't forget the water. Been filtering through those hills since before your species learned to space travel, I'd wager. I took another sip, this time allowing my secondary brain to reactivate and participate in the analysis. My color shifting had settled into a deep shade of purple, the hue of profound revelation. Here is more, Rory said, reaching for another bottle. This next one spent some time in casks that previously held a peated whiskey. Bit more aggressive on the flavor front. More, I squeaked, my professional composure completely abandoned. There are different varieties? Oh, aye. Every distillery has its own character. Every cask its own personality. Every year brings new surprises. He grinned. And we haven't even started on the blends yet. I realized then that my entire understanding of galactic cuisine was about to undergo a radical reformation, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I began to worry about what would happen when word of this got out to the wider galaxy. Because if this was what humans did with simple grain alcohol, what other culinary secrets were they hiding? Ready for the next one? Rory asked, already pouring. All three of my eyes focused on the new glass, and I noticed my tentacles were trembling slightly with anticipation. Ready? My dear human, I am just getting started. 3 Earth days into my investigation, my ship's AI was becoming increasingly concerned about my behavior. Chief Curator, it announced as I stumbled back aboard after another tasting session, I feel compelled to point out that your epidermis is displaying colors not previously recorded in our biological database. Nonsense, I replied, though I had to use 3 tentacles to steady myself against the ship's wall. I am conducting vital research. Did you know humans don't just make whiskey? They have something called wine that they create by letting fruit rot in specific ways. Specific ways? They've turned decomposition into an art form. The AI's pause was longer than usual. Sir, your secondary brain appears to be humming what my archives identify as an Earth drinking song called Sweet Caroline. I waved a tentacle dismissively, nearly knocking over my collection of sample bottles. After the initial whiskey tasting, Rory had introduced me to other local distillers, each with their own secrets and techniques. But that was just the beginning. My research had revealed that humans had developed fermentation and distillation techniques on every continent, each region creating its own unique poisons. Begin recording research notes, I commanded, settling into my gravity couch. Entry 47. Humans don't just age their spirits in wood. They age them in wood that previously held other spirits. It's like temporal flavor recursion. They're aging time itself. Noted, the AI replied dryly. Though I should mention that your last 46 entries have been variations on the theme of humans are fermentation geniuses. And I can't believe they drink this for fun. I ignored it, pulling up my holographic research display. The screen filled with data from my investigation. Rice wines from Asia that had been crafted for millennia. Agave spirits from Mexico that captured the essence of desert plants. Caribbean rums that told stories of sugarcane and sea air. Russian vodkas filtered through precious metals. Herbal liqueurs from monasteries that guarded their secrets for centuries. They have something called terroir, I continued, my color shifting to the deep blue of academic excitement. It means the drink tastes like the place it came from, not just the ingredients, the actual place. The soil, the air, the history. Chief Curator, the AI ventured. Perhaps we should notify the Galactic Culinary Council about these findings. Not yet, I said quickly, too quickly. Need more research. Did you know they make something called mead from insect vomit? Insect vomit, and it's delicious. What kind of species looks at insect regurgitation and thinks, yes, I'll ferment that? My research display showed an incoming message from the council, probably wondering why their chief critic had gone silent for 3 days. I ignored it, instead pulling up my notes on beer. They take grain, deliberately let it sprout, then heat it to stop the sprouting, then boil it with flowers, then add tiny organisms that eat the sugar and, you know what? Never mind. You wouldn't understand. You need taste receptors to truly appreciate the genius. Sir, the AI tried again. Your primary brain activity is showing unusual patterns, and your chromatophores are displaying what appears to be a tartan pattern. I looked down at my skin, which had indeed adopted a crisscrossing pattern of blues and greens. Fascinating. Must be a side effect of that 18-year-old Highlands single malt. Or was it the craft gin? No matter. The point is, we've been wrong about Earth. So very wrong. I pulled up more research data, my tentacles moving with excited urgency. They don't just make alcohol. They've developed countless variations, each with its own culture, tradition, and purpose. They age it, blend it, infuse it with plants, fruits, and spices. They've turned poison into poetry. And the most incredible part? They did it all without quantum aging chambers or molecular harmonizers. They just waited, experimented, refined their craft over generations. The AI's processing lights flickered in what I'd come to recognize as concern. Sir, your enthusiasm is noted, but perhaps we should consider the implications of releasing this information to the wider galaxy. The concept of recreational toxins might be disturbing to some species. I laughed, a sound that caused several of my ship's sensors to malfunction. Disturbing? It's revolutionary. Don't you see? Earth isn't a dead rock. It's a planet where life became so robust, so adaptable, that its dominant species learned to drink poison for pleasure and turn molecular decay into an art form. And this excites you? The AI asked cautiously. Excites me? My epidermis rippled with patterns of pure joy. This changes everything we thought we knew about culinary evolution. We need to reassess Earth's classification immediately. Any species that can make death itself delicious deserves far more than preservation status. The AI's next words were interrupted by another incoming council message. This one marked urgent. I knew I'd have to answer eventually, but first, I had a date with something Rory called a whiskey flight. After all, I told my concerned AI, we wouldn't want our report to be incomplete, would we? The grand ballroom of the Galactic Culinary Council's orbital station had never seen anything quite like this. Normally reserved for quantum cuisine demonstrations and photonic wine tastings, today it hosted what I had grandly titled Earth Spirit Appreciation Summit. Though my AI had suggested potential xenobiological incident waiting to happen might be more accurate. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of indeterminate manifestation, I announced to the assembled crowd of the galaxy's most renowned food critics and beverage connoisseurs, what you are about to experience will challenge everything you think you know about primitive worlds and evolutionary adaptation. Rory stood beside me, looking remarkably unimpressed by the floating crystal-serving platforms and anti-gravity wine decanters. He'd insisted on wearing his traditional distillery outfit, complete with what he called a flat cap, among all the bioluminescent formal wear and quantum-tailored suits. Before we begin, I continued, my epidermis shifting to professional shades of authority, I should note that Earth spirits have some unique properties. I've taken the liberty of adjusting everyone's toxic filtration systems to allow for full appreciation of the experience. In the front row, Grand Curator Velox of the Crab Nebula raised one of their eye stalks. Are you suggesting we deliberately allow toxins into our systems? How delightfully barbaric. Barbaric? Rory muttered under his breath. Says the creature drinking fermented starlight through its elbows. The first round was relatively tame, a selection of fine wines presented alongside the galaxy's most prestigious stellar vintages. The critics swirled, sniffed, and in some cases absorbed through their membranes. Notes were taken, quantum pads buzzed with activity, and several beings began displaying unusual color patterns. This Bordeaux actually pairs quite well with neutron nectar, commented food critic X. Paul, their crystalline form taking on a distinctly rosy hue. Though I am detecting some unusual molecular behaviors. Things got more interesting when we moved to the spirits. I'd arranged them in order of intensity, starting with smooth Japanese whiskies and working up to the peated Scottish varieties. Rory had insisted on bringing his distillery's special reserves, including something he called cask strength, that made my sensors short out just from proximity. The complexity is remarkable, noted Professor Zyx'tal of the Culinary Institute of Betelgeuse. But how do they achieve these flavor profiles without quantum aging? Their third mouth was still working on processing a 21-year-old Highlands single malt. That's the beauty of it, I explained, watching as various alien anatomies attempted to cope with the concept of recreational ethanol consumption. They just wait. They put the liquid in wooden containers and let time do the work. Preposterous, declared Grand Curator Vlox, though I noticed their eye stalks were having trouble focusing. Next, you'll tell us they don't even use molecular harmonizers for their flavor matrices. Actually, Rory chimed in, a mischievous glint in his eye, would anyone like to try something we call a boilermaker? That's when things started getting properly interesting. It turned out that different species processed Earth spirits in wildly different ways. The crystalline beings from Rigel 7 began to chime in harmonic frequencies after trying bourbon. A group of plasma-based critics started spontaneously phase-shifting after sampling tequila. Two silicon-based entities attempted to merge into a single consciousness after experiencing Irish whiskey. Fascinating, Professor Zyx'tal exclaimed, now speaking simultaneously from all 5 mouths. The ethanol molecules appear to be creating temporary quantum tunnels in my digestive system. I can taste colors. That's nice, Rory said calmly, pouring another round. Wait until you try the cask strength. In the corner, a cluster of energy beings who had sampled the vodka were attempting to teach their serving drone to dance. They weren't doing very well, but their enthusiasm was commendable. Meanwhile, Grand Curator Vlox had developed an intense philosophical relationship with a bottle of gin, discussing botanical consciousness with it at length. Should we be concerned? My AI whispered, its circuits practically radiating worry. Several beings are displaying unprecedented biological reactions. Nonsense, I replied, though I had to use 3 tentacles to stay upright. This is exactly what's supposed to happen. I think, Rory, this is normal, right? Rory surveyed the scene of intergalactic inebriation with professional detachment. Aye, more or less. Though the floating ones might want to designate a driver for their cloud formation. The event reached its crescendo when we introduced the concept of cocktails. The idea that humans not only drank spirits, but mixed them together with other substances for enhanced effects, caused several critics to need emergency stabilization. When Rory demonstrated how to make a Manhattan, 3 different species declared Earth a Class 10 civilization on the spot. But what's the purpose? Demanded one particularly scholarly critic, their quantum monocle askew. Surely they don't do this purely for pleasure. Sometimes, Rory replied, mixing another round with the casual expertise of 4 decades. The purpose is to not have a purpose. Sometimes you just want to sit with friends, share a dram, and see where the evening takes you. This concept, drinking for social enjoyment rather than molecular enlightenment, proved even more revolutionary than the spirits themselves. Across the ballroom, beings who had spent centuries critiquing the molecular perfection of quantum-aged wines were discovering something new. The simple pleasure of having a drink with friends, even if those friends happened to be from different star systems and had varying numbers of sensory appendages. I watched it all with satisfaction, my epidermis glowing with all the colors of success. Until, that is, Grand Curator Vlox attempted to initiate a traditional Earth conga line and accidentally merged with the space-time continuum. The emergency session of the Galactic Culinary Council was not going well. For one thing, Grand Curator Vlox was still partially merged with the space-time continuum, causing their statements to be heard both 5 minutes before and 3 minutes after they actually spoke them. For another, the council chamber's gravity stabilizers were struggling to compensate for the number of beings who hadn't quite figured out how to process Earth alcohol. This is unprecedented, declared High Commissioner Y. Reth, their normally pristine tentacles still showing traces of what Rory had called a whiskey sour. We have multiple reports of spontaneous quantum entanglement, temporary consciousness expansion, and at least one case of a hive mind developing individual personalities, each with their own drink preferences. I stood before the council, trying to maintain my professional dignity despite my epidermis, still displaying what appeared to be a persistent tartan pattern. Rory stood beside me, looking far too amused for someone potentially facing intergalactic incident charges. Furthermore, the High Commissioner continued, 17 different species have formally requested Earth spirits be classified as a controlled substance. The Rigelians are demanding access to something called bourbon futures, and the Silicon Collective has submitted a 300-page thesis on the philosophical implications of beer. With all due respect, I interjected, isn't this exactly the kind of cultural exchange the Council is meant to facilitate? Cultural exchange? Yareth's color shifted to the ultraviolet spectrum of exasperation. The Andromedans have developed a new form of mathematics just to explain the flavor profile of single malt scotch. Aye, Rory nodded sagely. That'll be the peat influence. Before the High Commissioner could respond, their quantum pad chimed with another urgent message. And now, the hive consciousness of Betelgeuse is requesting immigration forms. They want to open something called an Irish pub in the Horsehead Nebula. That's when Rory cleared his throat, drawing all eyes, stalks, and sensory appendages in the chamber. "If I might make a suggestion," he said, pulling out a small notebook that I'd seen him consult during tastings. "On Earth, we've got something that might help. We call them drinking guidelines." The council chamber fell silent, even Velox's time-displaced commentary temporarily syncing up. "You see," Rory continued, "not everyone handles their drink the same way. Some folks stick to light beer. Others can handle their cask-strength whiskey. The trick isn't banning the spirits, it's teaching people how to appreciate them responsibly." "You mean, create a standardized system for safe consumption across different species?" The High Commissioner's tentacles twisted thoughtfully. "Exactly." I jumped in, catching Rory's drift. "We could establish proper protocols, classification systems for different physiologies. Some species might need to dilute their spirits with neutron stars. Others might need to consume them through quantum filters. And," Rory added with a twinkle in his eye, "we could include some of our other time-honored Earth traditions, like designated stellar drivers, drinking plenty of water between drams, and never mixing antimatter with tequila." The council chamber buzzed with discussion. Even Grand Curator Velox managed to contribute coherently, though their suggestions arrived several minutes after the relevant topics had passed. Finally, High Commissioner Wyreth raised their primary appendage for silence. Perhaps we have been too hasty in our judgment. After all, any species that can turn molecular poison into an art form while developing social protocols to manage its effects, that shows a remarkable level of cultural sophistication. "Does this mean Earth spirits will be approved for galactic distribution?" I asked hopefully. "Under strict guidelines," Wyreth clarified. "And with one condition, we'll need someone to oversee the implementation of these protocols. Someone with experience in both Earth spirits and galactic cuisine." All eyes turned to me, and I felt my epidermis shift to the deep purple of destiny. "Well," Rory whispered, "looks like you've just become the galaxy's first interstellar bartender." One standard galactic year later, I stood in the observation deck of the Angel's Share, the first Earth spirit embassy in space, orbiting conveniently between major trade routes. Below me, Earth continued its quiet rotation, no longer classified as just another preservation world, but now recognized as the birthplace of what the Council had termed recreational molecular artistry. Rory, now the official Earth ambassador for spiritual affairs, a title that still made him chuckle, was conducting a masterclass in whiskey appreciation for a group of plasma beings. They had developed a particular fondness for peated malts, claiming the smoky molecules reminded them of their home nebula's stellar nurseries. My AI, which had finally stopped trying to warn me about toxin levels, was busy managing the embassy's extensive database of species-specific drinking guidelines. "Sir," it announced, "the Silicon Collective has just published their 4th treatise on the metaphysics of hangovers." In one corner of the bar, a group of crystalline entities were enjoying something they'd created called a quantum cocktail. Earth spirits mixed with traditional galactic beverages. Their latest invention, the neutron star Manhattan, had become quite popular, though it did occasionally cause temporary violations of the laws of physics. "You know what the best part is?" Rory said, joining me at the window after his class. "They're starting to understand it's not just about the drinks. It's about the stories, the traditions, the way it brings folks together, even folks with completely different molecular structures." He was right. The embassy had become more than just a beverage center. It was a cultural hub where beings from across the galaxy could experience a uniquely human approach to social interaction. Some species had even started developing their own variations on Earth traditions. The Andromedans had created a delightful interpretation of a pub quiz, though their questions about quantum mechanics were a bit challenging after a few drinks. To Earth, I raised my glass, my epidermis glowing with contentment. "The planet that taught the galaxy how to turn poison into poetry." "To Earth," Rory agreed, then added with a wink, "and to properly regulated drinking guidelines." In the distance, a Rigelian cruise ship approached the embassy, its passengers eagerly anticipating their first Earth Spirit experience tour. I smiled, all 3 of my eyes twinkling. The galaxy would never be quite the same, and that was exactly how we liked it.